Sounds good.
All right.
NPR podcasts are now available on every platform. Check out all our shows at npr.org/podcasts. That's npr.org/podcasts.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Speer. President Trump walked out of a meeting with congressional leaders today where they were supposed to try to negotiate an end to the government shutdown. As NPR's Tamara Keith reports, the president and Democrats are no closer together on the question of a border wall.
They don't agree on how to end the government shutdown, but they do agree that the meeting in the White House Situation Room meant to find common ground ended quickly and not well. Here is Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer.
He asked Speaker Pelosi, will you agree to my wall? She said no. And he just got up and said, then we have nothing to discuss, and he just walked out.
Vice President Mike Pence's take.
He asked Speaker Pelosi that if he opened things up quickly, if he reopened the government quickly, would she be willing to agree to funding for a wall or a barrier on the southern border? And when she said no, the president said goodbye.
And the shutdown continues. Tamara Keith, NPR News, the White House.
The former commanding officer of the Guantanamo Bay military base is facing federal criminal charges. As NPR's Ryan Lucas explains, the charges stem from the 2015 death of a civilian who worked at the base.
U.S. Navy Captain John Nettleton faces 10 counts in all, including false statements, falsifying records, and obstruction of justice. The charges contained in a federal indictment unsealed in Florida relate to the death of Christopher Turr, whose body was found floating in the waters of Guantanamo Bay in 2015. Turr had worked as a civilian at the base. The indictment says Nettleton hid from investigators that he had had an affair with Turr's wife. Nettleton also hid that he had had a fight with Turr the night that Turr went missing. Nettleton's initial court appearance is Wednesday in Jacksonville, Florida. Ryan Lucas, NPR News, Washington.
A planned U.S. troop withdrawal from Syria will not be canceled. That's despite Turkish threats against Washington's Kurdish allies in the region. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the Kurds will still be protected. Meeting with leaders in Iraq's capital today in the semi-autonomous Kurdistan region, Pompeo sought to reassure allies following announcements by President Trump he plans to pull troops out of Syria.
We're having conversations with him even as we speak about how we will effectuate this in a way that protects our forces, to make sure that the Americans, as we withdraw, are safe, and we will complete the mission of taking down the last elements of the caliphate before we depart.
The visits to Baghdad and the Kurdish regional capital Erbil come on the second day of a Mideast visit by Pompeo, who'll be making a number of stops to explain U.S. policy. Newly released minutes from the Federal Reserve's final meeting of last year may provide comfort for some that future Fed rate increases could be more measured. Policymakers in minutes from the December meeting apparently were not unanimous on whether to raise rates a quarter of a point that session. The Fed has already indicated that only 2 more rate hikes are likely this year. On Wall Street, the Dow closed up 91 points today. You're listening to NPR. Reforms are coming to a solitary confinement unit in Jackson, Georgia, that an expert is calling one of the harshest and most draconian in the nation. That's after a federal settlement between the state and 2 men who've been confined there. Member station WABE, Johnny Kaufman has the story.
The settlement says that every person held in the solitary unit must be allowed at least 4 hours outside their cell on weekdays. And there are other reforms, too, like limits on how long someone can be held on the unit. Timothy Gumm and Robert Watkins brought the case. Gumm was in solitary for 7.5 years. Watkins has been confined for 10. Sarah Garrity is a lawyer with the Southern Center for Human Rights. It represented the men.
It's time for us to move out of the dark ages here, and a civilized society does not keep people locked in isolation cells for years upon end.
Garrity says she hopes the federal settlement will lead to changes in Georgia's other solitary confinement units. For NPR News, I'm Johnny Kaufman in Atlanta.
Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos and his wife have announced they are divorcing after 25 years of marriage. Bezos at the moment holds the title of world's richest man. According to a statement posted on Twitter, the pair have decided to divorce after a trial separation but remain on good terms and plan to work together in the future. Bezos and his wife Mackenzie have a fortune estimated upwards of $140 billion, where virtually all of that is tied up in Amazon stock. Bezos also owns rocket ship maker Blue Origin and The Washington Post. Crude oil futures prices were up today 5% to end the session at $52.36 a barrel in New York. I'm Jack Speer, NPR News in Washington.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I'm Kat Hobson. I'm your host for this evening on Paranormal Experienced Radio with my guest, Marie D. Jones. And again, I want to just put out there that all of our law enforcement personnel, I know it's the Law Enforcement Appreciation Day, and we here do. We appreciate every one of you, and we hope that you are safe at the end of every watch. And Marie, I just don't even know where to go. We're talking in chat about Brenda having a budget, and her first purchase of your work was Super Volcano.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you.
And let's see, the future book is going to be the next one. So
I loved that book because I wrote it with my dad.
I know.
And he passed away a few years ago. We were going to write another book and we didn't have a chance, but that was just such a dream come true to write a book. I've written a book with my son, and now, then I wrote Super Volcano with my dad, and because he's a geophysicist, and he had a background in seismology. So it was a really interesting experience writing with your father.
Especially a man just as versed with things as yours was.
Well, my dad, the scientist mentality, and his writing background was always technical, scientific journals and whatnot. And he always had wanted to write a book. And I felt like, oh, this is something that I can offer to my dad, to make his dream come true. And it was really interesting because I was afraid that his writing would be so scientific and formal that how would our writing styles mesh? So he he really did all of the formal research and the writing. And then I did some of the chapters where it was a little more, informational, things that I could grasp. And because I knew a lot growing up, I knew a lot about volcanoes and earthquakes and earth science, just growing up with a father like that. So, but that was really cool. Yeah. And it's funny because, for a while last year, there were a couple of volcanic eruptions where we were getting a little worried. Mm-hmm. Me and other people that had written about super volcanoes, that maybe something could be triggered, but so far so good.
Well, you live right there on the Pacific Rim, coming around.
We are on the Pacific part of the Ring of Fire.
Yes. And
luckily, well, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say that. I was going to say, luckily, we don't have any volcanoes here in San Diego, but one thing we did write about in Super Volcano that I really had no idea was our close proximity to two super volcanoes, Yellowstone and an even more dangerous one, Long Valley, which is even closer. And my dad had been working on a theory about how if the San Andreas Fault goes, if it erupts, and we have that super earthquake that we're always being told the big one is coming. And if it happened on the southern part of the San Andreas Fault, it could possibly trigger a supervolcanic eruption at Long Valley.
Oh my goodness.
So in the book, we presented a kind of a fictional scenario if that happened. But all along, now there's the possibility of a supervolcano under the Cascade region up like in Portland or Oregon, Washington coast area. So yeah, it's very active. Maybe not as active as Japan and Sumatra and Indonesia and other parts of the world on the Ring of Fire, but we do have a lot of earthquakes. We have not had a fairly big one in a while, so everybody's always kind of on edge waiting.
But it's always tremoring there. I used to have to go. I used to get to go to San Jose. I flew into San Jose, but would go out to. Well, now my brain just went dead because San Jose popped on up. Where
San
surfing
Francisco?
started, where the surfing museum is.
Santa
Cruz.
Cruz?
Santa
Yes, I
Cruz.
love Santa Cruz. Oh, love it up there.
Well, I was sitting in an office trying to get a system functioning, and there's debris falling in front of my face.
Oh, no.
And it didn't dawn on me what was going on. And it was very disconcerting because where I'm from, the only thing that moves the earth is the surf if you go south. Right?
Yeah.
And I was sitting there.
Oklahoma, you're
I'm in Alabama.
So you're way over on the coast. So yeah, you're pretty safe, but it seems like you might get some earthquakes off the coast in the ocean that might affect you, but you never know.
But I'm the Gulf Coast. I'm in that little horseshoe.
Okay, so you're pretty safe. You get the hurricanes and all that stuff, right?
Yeah, because they get stuck in that Gulf and they just kind of wander around.
Yeah, okay, so you're pretty safe. But yeah, I bet it was such a foreign feeling to have the earth moving under your feet.
It was,
right?
And to be so low,
It's like, wait a
while
minute.
it happened.
It's not supposed to do that.
No.
The ground under my feet should be solid. It is. We have a lot of little ones. Every few weeks we feel something. Could be really small. The last big one was a few years ago. It's been quite a while since we've had, something really huge, but they're always a presence, and we feel the little ones. And luckily, San Diego, we're far enough from where the San Andreas Fault kind of shoots off. It shoots off to the east.
Right.
So we're not as close to where the fault is as like LA is. But still, it's going to be devastating if that happens, and it'll be even worse if it triggers a super volcano. So I try to be prepared. I'm always, I'm trained in disaster preparedness and response. I have been for over 20 years. Earthquakes were a big part of the reason why, but we also get even more destructive wildfires. Those are terrifying.
Yes. Oh my God.
Terrifying.
It is. Yeah. And, that's a good... now we're going to disaster survival.
Yeah.
I do not know how anyone, really can live in any region, but more specifically yours, and not be fully trained in emergency management. We just had, Brenda said, tell you about the earthquake in Tennessee. We had a very, for here, large earthquake that came down from Tennessee into North Georgia, and we get tornadoes all the time. We're in Tornado Alley.
Yes. Oh, those are scary.
Those are scary, especially when they come at night. And at least in the daytime, they've got cameras on them, so you have a feel for what's coming straight at you. But at night, you just don't know. And y'all. To quote Buffett, riots, fires, and mudslides.
Yeah, but honestly, no matter where you are in the country, you're dealing with something. Mm-hmm. Either hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, blizzards, black ice. We have earthquakes, volcanoes, whatever. Not only that, but then you got to think about all the man-made threats.
Oh gosh, yes.
Terrorism, live, active shooting situations. So.
Chemical attacks.
But for me, the earthquakes, the thing about an earthquake that makes it, I think, a little bit different is that weird belief that we have that the ground that we stand on is solid.
Mm-hmm.
And when it starts to shake, it literally shakes up one of the most fundamental beliefs that we have as human beings. And that's that, we're walking on solid ground. And so it can be very disconcerting and also traumatizing. I lived in LA for 15 years. I lived through some of the biggest earthquakes, the deadliest, the Northridge earthquake.
Yes. Oh, gosh,
my ex-husband and I, we suffered PTSD. We had counseling. People I worked with, we had counseling on site. I worked at Warner Brothers. And we had counselors that were at the studio. I worked in the record division. people were traumatized, grown men. It